hope you're having a great evening. Welcome to our ReggieCon panel discussing Bitterroot in celebration of Black History Month. So this is the first ReggieCon panel for the spring semester, but there are many more to come. My name is Jana Albrecht, and I am the Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management here at Illinois State University. Before we begin the panel, sorry, I have a few housekeeping items to keep us all running smoothly. So first, just so you know, we do record the session. It will get posted to the ReggieCon website. Second, if some of you need confirmation that you attended tonight's event, we'll post a link to that towards the end of the presentation or to the end of the panel. Third, the presenter's video and audio are on, but they can't hear you or see you as a guest. So, that said, we will monitor the Q&A function, and we do encourage you to ask those questions soon and often, but just know that it may be a minute before they get to your question, but they love them, so keep them coming. Last, we're just letting you know that you should check the ReggieCon website for previous panels because there's a lot of great video out there, and then stay tuned for our future panels. So enough of the housekeeping from me. At this time, I am pleased to introduce our fearless leader, Dr. Scott Jordan. Dr. Jordan is the chair of psychology here at Illinois State, and he also happens to be our moderator and a panelist for tonight's discussion. So Scott, please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Jana, and welcome everyone to ReggieCon, the con that asks the question, hey, what's your story? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher here at Illinois State University. And tonight we come together to celebrate Black History Month with a discussion of author David Walker's Eisner-Award-winning comic graphic novel, Bitterroot. Joining me in tonight's discussion is a crew of pop culture aficionados. We begin with ISU's Interim Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, Dr. Byron Craig. Byron, please come on in and say hi and tell everybody a little something about who you are and what you do.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Byron Craig, as Dr. Jordan just said, and I'm the Chief Interim Equity and Inclusion Officer at ISU. I'm also a professor in the School of Comm, and my research is basically on rhetoric and race, and a lot of that involves media studies, including film and television. And I do have a book edited volume coming out in July, and Dr.
Awesome.
Jordan is featured in that volume as well.
No, excellent. So glad you're here, and participating in your book project was an absolute treat. Thanks for the invitation. Also joining this evening's discussion, clinical counseling psychology professor from the Department of Psychology, Dr. Caitlin Mercier. Caitlin, please introduce yourself. Tell the audience a little something about who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Caitlin Mercier. So a little bit of what I do. I teach psychology of women for women's gender and sexuality studies. And I also teach Black psychology. Much of my research is looking at the intersections of colorism and anti-Black racism and how it impacts Black communities, especially Black women. And on the flip side, I also look at anti-vegetarian stigmatization in vegans of color and other marginalized identities. So it's great to be here with y'all today.
It's great to have you here. And you and I have talked about the intersectionality of your research topics quite often. It's absolutely amazing. By the way, Dr. Byron Craig, please go ahead, keep your camera on so we'll fill up the squares like we're watching Hollywood Squares or something as we go through. Now, go ahead. Say it again.
I said I got confused. Sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. And now it's my extreme pleasure to introduce tonight's next panelist. You've seen him on ReggieCon before, the one, the only, Inkpot award-winning author, Mr. Alex Simmons. Alex, please come on into the Zoom room and tell us a little something about who you are and what you do. Let me just call in right now.
Yeah, I get my own theme song and everything. Hi, I'm Alex Simmons. I'm not a doctor, but I played one on television. No, that's beside the point. I'm as Scott has said, I'm an award-winning author of plays, children's books, comics, and more. I've written for Disney, Penguin, Random House, Marvel, DC, Archie. I've also created a kids and family event called the Kids Comic-Con, which is going into its 18th year. I've written documentaries. I've been a guest speaker both and a lecturer on children, on empowering kids, on imagination, on creative writing. I've also been a writing coach, both nationally and internationally. So I've spoken in various countries, and it's very hard to shut me up. So I'll be talking a lot here tonight. So we'll talk more about that later. Thank you.
Well, Alex, it's fantastic to see you again. Absolutely thrilled that you're here. And now our next panelist, you've seen her before, the curator of the Culture Film Festival and co-instructor of the Ethnographic Film Series at the Normal Theater, Dr. Eric Wesselmann. Eric, please come on in the Zoom room. Let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, I'm Dr. Eric Wesselmann, social psychologist. My research focuses on the dynamics of social inclusion and exclusion in daily life. I'm also a fan of all things nerdy and love to chat with smart, cool people about things we're fans of. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Excellent. Good to see you again, Eric. And now, one and all, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome to tonight's discussion our very special guest, author of Shaft, A Complicated Man, Marvel Comics Power Man and Iron Fist, and with Michael Bendis, the DC comic series Naomi, which aired as a television series by the same name on the CW network. The one, the only, author David Walker. David, please say hi to the audience and tell them a little something about who you are and what you do.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me. So, yeah, my name Alex. It's great to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. I mean, I see you on Instagram all the time, but
We didn't talk much, but we'll do that later. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, my name's David Walker, and I am a writer, primarily comics and graphic novels, although I've written for film. And I have my first prose YA novel coming out this summer. Co-creator of Root, co-creator of Naomi. I've written for Marvel, written for DC, written for just about everybody. Now I've ventured more into the world of graphic novels as opposed to comic books. For anyone wondering the difference between the two, you need a bookmark to read a graphic novel. Comic books are pamphlets. They're the training wheels that lead us to the graphic novel. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I also teach, and I was just coming back from my class, and I was stuck in traffic and running late, and was like, oh boy, this is like, it was one
We
of
got
those.
you covered. All good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to pretend to be you, so that's okay.
There you go.
Took that right out.
That's okay, because I pretended to be you plenty of times, Alex.
Okay.
So.
There you go. So, by the way, I invite all of the panelists to leave your mics open if you like. If you don't want to, that's up to you, but it's perfectly fine if you do. And before we start the discussion of this fantastic comic series, I do think it's important we thank those people who make us look like we know what we're doing. All right. And first of all, I want to thank, as I've already mentioned earlier, Dr. Jana Albrecht. She's involved in enrollment management and student services at the university, and she's very supportive of ReggieCon these past 4 years. And of course, Mr. Sean Thornton does all the beautiful artwork for ReggieCon, which, if you've noticed, is stunning. Miss Summer Simmons, she makes sure that the Zoom workshop room is clean and orderly and functioning properly, and she makes sure we all have the right links. Miss Danny Schroeder works over in university management, and Miss Kelly Harmon works in the Department of Psychology, making sure we all get what we need to get when we need to get it. And then finally, Miss Julie Mayana Perez is involved in advertising ReggieCon on the university's social media. So thanks so much to them for all they do, and as I said, for making us look like we know what we're doing. So what I want to do is explain a little bit about how ReggieCon works, because it's a format that we used the very first episode we did 3.5 years ago, and we've just stuck with it. Basically, what I've asked is the panelists to pick their favorite frame or page from the text. And then what they're going to do is I'm going to share that frame page with everyone. And that person's going to have 2 or 3 minutes to sort of explain why they picked that one. And then once they get that idea out in the air, I think we could probably talk about every one of those for an hour. We'll talk about every one of those for a few minutes, get David's insights or reactions to what we say, and then we'll go to the next image from there. So I've put these in an order. Let me go ahead and share this real quick. Okay, so you're all seeing that slide you've already seen. So I believe this is Alex's, one of Alex's two. And Alex, you'll know in a second why I put this one up first for you. So
Okay,
Alex, if you could explain to us why this is a frame you chose or a page you chose.
Well, for one, just so you, Dave, I want you to sign this for me before we go. This is really, I mean, there's so many great images in the book, and the writing is, we'll talk about that. But one of the things that this page did for me, because I also teach screenwriting, is it's an excellent example of letting the audience know exactly not only what tone and atmosphere we're immersed in, but what's going on in 3 different locations that are tying together the entire story while we are building up, or what's called a rising action, while we're building up towards a mini climax. There's a major one coming later on, but we're building up to this mini climax. And so it's just a wonderful, it's almost like quick cuts from this sort of chaotic scene in an urban city environment to this tremendous, hectic and fearful moment when our heroes are in a very dire situation, to this quiet country sort of backwoods feel. And all of them tie together both structurally, storytelling wise, and visually to give us a really good taste of where this story is going to take us, what kind of ride we're going to be on. So this was, I just loved the page. I didn't want to pick a panel. I just loved how the page worked together.
David, you got any reactions to that?
Of course I got a reaction to that. No, thank you, Alex. That's I think that's issue 3 or 4 of Bitterroot. I could be wrong. It might be 2. No, it's definitely not 2. It's 3. And it was, this was, I have this very annoying habit, and it really drives my collaborators bonkers, which is like, I'm always like, let's push the envelope of what we can do. There's this misconception that comics are, they're a lot like film because they're both visual, and it's when in reality comics are actually more like prose than they are like film, and I won't get into a very long explanation of that. But what I'm endlessly fascinated with is how time and space exists in a comic, right? And because of that, you can. Alex was talking about there's an almost cinematic feel to that scene, but you couldn't do a scene like that in film because you can't have you could have all 3 scenes in a split screen, but it would be really confusing. That would be too much sensory overload. But comics allows for that. It allows you to do multiple storylines on the same page, and you can look at them all at once, but then you can examine them individually. And I know that at one point I had wanted to do the entire issue that way, was like a 3-tiered storyline. And I can tell you that I lack the skills as a writer to be able to pull that off. I tried it. I've tried it. That was the first major time I tried it. I've tried it a couple of times since. And at some point, I'm going to get there. At some point, I'm going to have, 3 simultaneous stories running across the pages. But it was definitely not easy. It was easy to do a single page that way. But the moment you start going deeper, the pacing goes off. But
we'll dance together later, David. Not that I would contradict you, but I would add to what you said in terms of there being some experiences there, but I hear you. I totally hear you. I just feel that, again, this pulled it off very well, and how we would do it in film would be a different scenario, but that's fine.
What if I could quickly, first, this felt like a kind of holding our breath for a moment before the final movement of the piece, all things kind of coming together in one, and then boom, we go off and finish. I do have a question about the creative process, because I love to talk to creators, and particularly creative collaborations. So you notice that the color schemes, of course, the color schemes in these 3 frames all match the color schemes that those stories were told in throughout the story. And the question is, when did you guys, was it serendipitous that when you got to this part of the writing, you realized that you'd use the 3 different color frames? How did it come about that this frame ended up containing the same color scheme as the 3 separate stories? Or was that obvious from the beginning?
It's been a while since we did this particular issue, but knowing myself, I would have put this in the script. I would have said,
yeah.
And I'm working on a project now where we're trying to do something similar. And I was just explaining to somebody recently, I said, in comics, color can equal time, color can equal space, color can equal emotion, color can become a signifier that immediately lets the reader know there's more to be understood on the page. And that was the thing. My goal always as a creator is to work with my collaborators to tell a story as clearly as possible, even if that story is complex, or if there's, and so in the case of that page, there's a lot going on just within each one of those individual panels. And so again, what's the easiest way to differentiate those? Well, the easiest way is color. And I my theories about color, I really didn't start to evolve until there was a particular art team that I worked with, and the penciler and the inker, I'm not going to name them, and I'm not going to name the series or the publisher, but they actually got into a really heated argument with the editor over color, and the editor was asking for something that they didn't agree with, and I'd never seen artists stand up for color this way, and the artist went into this long explanation of what color means in comics and what it can possibly do, and as a writer, these were ideas that had been floating around in my head a little bit, but it was so well articulated that now I bring that to everything. I think about not just the coloring, but I think about the lettering. I think about, okay, where can it be placed? What are the words that are going to be made bold? Because the words are more than just words. They're actually part of the art. That's the thing about lettering in comics. It is part of the art. And if you don't treat the lettering as an art form in and of itself, if you don't treat the coloring as both an art form, but as a crucial tool, you're missing the opportunity to tell the best story possible.
You just quoted Ken Brusnak.
Did I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's a letterer, right?
Yes. He was one of those letterers who always looked at the story, looked at the era of the story, time period, the locations, the cultural effects, and then brought that lettering to that artwork. Which is one of the reasons I worked with him for 3 different books, because he was just an integral part of creating that whole visual effect. So I'm right with you there, man.
Thank you.
Scott,
Eric, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you. Would you be able to bring the image back up, please? Because David, you were talking about the sort of construction of the image and the multi-layered aspect of constructing storytelling. And what I love about this series of 3 panels is that, we have sort of at the top and the bottom, we have sort of this emotional build, the sort of most, sort of kinetic action is in the middle there with Berg as he's struggling with his infection. And Berg is breaking the gutter there, right? Yeah. Which is not a very common thing. So when it does happen, it's like, bam, right? So could you talk a little bit about what that means to you as a storyteller?
Well, it means more than anything, it means that Sanford, the artist, is going to do whatever he wants to do.
Okay.
Straightforward answer, man.
But it's interesting because as we were looking at it, even before Eric, before you mentioned that, I was looking at how he was breaking the panel, and in that, and I tend to get really like very picayune about some of these sort of things, right? But in that particular panel, it works because not only is it as the middle panel, it's this moment of chaos, in between these two moments in which, like, okay, we know there's something serious and tense going on. The top one, it's very clear. The bottom one, we're not really sure what's going to happen next. But that idea that it's breaking, that in that second panel that it is breaking out of the borders, lets you know on an almost subconscious level that, like, everything that's happening is a like the world is about to collide or cross over, mishmash. And so it's one of those things where, as a storyteller, I think that Sanford really, hit a home run on that particular page, because those aren't the sort of things that I very seldom will say, hey, why don't we break the panel here? I will talk a lot about, like, the emotion that we want to feel, and without having that script for that particular page in front of me, I may have said, like, okay, this is an explosive moment that's right before we know it's about to get really ugly, really bad. And then it's up to the artist to see how they interpret it. And some artists every artist interprets it differently. And to me, my philosophy is, when I look at a page that I've either written or co-written, my first gut response should always be, wow, who wrote this? Like, in a positive way, not in the not in a negative, like what the hell am I looking at? And sometimes that happens. Artist doesn't pay attention at all. But my job is to create words and ideas, the vast majority of which the reader never sees in their original intended format, or not their intended format, in their original format. Most of what I write gets translated into something visual. And I do think a lot about, like, where's the reader's eyes going to go? I'm very, and this is where I become sort of a stickler. I'll be very clear. I'm like, okay, they're moving left to right, and I will tell an artist, if a panel comes back and the characters are moving right to left, I'm like, you got two choices. You can either redraw it, or, in Photoshop, you can flip it. But like, if the reader is reading and the characters are moving left to right, the story's moving forward. And we're talking American comics, we're not talking manga, because in manga, it's the exact opposite. But if they're moving right to left, the story's going backwards.
Excellent. On that note, I think we'll go to our next image, and
Hey,
go
Scott,
ahead.
real quick for a second. So
Yeah.
it's funny this morning, David. I'll be transparent. This is an area that I haven't worked that much in, but two things really quickly. I had a student this morning saying, "Are we supposed to read this from left to right or right to left?" I was like, "What are you even talking about?" Right? And so he explained that to me. But I did want to say something real quick about that image. What I love in this image are those little things in there, right? So in the very beginning, on that, thank you, on the screen where it says "sweet picking," right? Yeah. And then at the very bottom, the thing that I was drawn to when I saw this panel was way in the back, the flag.
Yep.
Right, hanging there. And I thought that was just brilliant, right? And so, I wonder if you could just say for a second before we move on, right? How do you even, what is the imagination or the way you go about thinking, I'm going to put this there and put that sign up there, right? Because those seem like they're very small things, right? But they're very telling about the entire story for me.
Yeah, and it's great that you notice those things. So that club, it's a Harlem nightclub that we made up, in part because I kept fighting with Sanford and Chuck, trying to explain to them that neither the Apollo Theater nor the Cotton Club existed yet. So we needed a place to ground, in which we could allow music and the musicality of the Harlem Renaissance, which is when the story takes place, to have a place to live and breathe. And so I can't remember when I came up with the name for Sweet Pickin', but it just sounded like, a nice name for a nightclub in Harlem in 1925, 1926. And then in that bottom panel, it was, it was really clear, there's danger, right? Like to me, the Confederate flag represents two or three things. Danger is number one. It also represents, traitorous anti-Americans, terrorism. And it doesn't have to be big. But as that scene progresses, as that location, that story in northern Mississippi begins to unfold, you realize like, okay, yeah, wait a sec, they are entering into essentially, there could have just as easily been a sign that said you're about to enter hell. And that's
Go back.
yeah. So and
All right.
those are the little details that sometimes I tend to try to think about all that stuff. I don't always think about it first draft, but then you get into the second, third, fourth, or sometimes the 15th draft of a story, and you start thinking about, well, if the first rule in comics is show don't tell, right? Now you've got a caption that says Northern Mississippi, but you've got this tiny little Confederate flag hanging there. It tells you something, right? And so it's always about trying to figure out how much of the story can you show, and then let the reader draw their own conclusions.
Thank you.
Excellent. On that note, we're going to go ahead and go to the next image, and this is Eric's.
All right, thank you. So I cheated a little bit and decided to pick 2 pages because I felt like they were conceptually linked, at least in the way I experienced the narrative. So I become interested in social dynamics of identity. How do people answer the question, who am I? And those answers are complex and involve multiple levels, individual characteristics, social relationships, broader identity categories and backgrounds. Our identities can very much be somewhat malleable depending upon the different times in our lives, developmentally, even in the immediate social context. So one story I like to tell my students is, I'm from Normal, Illinois, and usually that doesn't sort of become very important to me. But one time when I was 21 or so, I was over in Chartres, France, and not around many people from the United States, let alone Illinois or even Normal. And we happened to run into other tourists who were from Normal, Illinois. And at that moment, that connection was very, very important. And so when we look at these pages here, I have 2 different sets of characters. So we have 2 police officers on the left-hand side central panel, where they're dropping off some infected characters to the Sangrier family. And you have the white police officer saying, hold on, I gotta see if I can read that here. They're discussing, he's talking to his black colleague, and he says, well, here's your people. And the black police officer's like, no, the Sangrier aren't my people, because my people don't mess with mumbo jumbo. Right. Yeah. And so he's drawing, whereas the white cop is like, race is salient in his mind here. For the black cop, it's not. We then contrast it to the right-hand side. We have the white character, Sonny Ray, who is the surviving member of a group of KKK who are about to lynch an individual. And Ford's Sangre shows up, or is that, I can't quite read the name. Yeah, Ford. Yeah, Ford. And kills all the infected ones and leaves Sonny Ray. And Sonny Ray's like, you killed my folks, right? Only it comes out like he's not talking about people who he's related to. Yeah. He's like, oh, wait, I don't really know them all well. Now, of course, he just got the gun pointed at him. He's like, no, I only kind of half know him. I never lynched anybody. So, we of course can stop and say, well, he's about to get shot, so contextually bound, suddenly it's less important to him. But that character as well, as time goes on, he joins Ford on his quest, right? Yeah. So both the police officers, Sonny Ray, we get to see over this course of the story, their ideas of identity evolve as well. So I'll take comments off camera.
No, it's that's really interesting because with the cop especially, and it's going to drive me bonkers because I can't remember his name. They were both of those cops were sort of throwaway characters in the beginning, and then the black officer again, whose name is eluding me right now, sort of grew into a crucial supporting character, and and um and this is sort of the organic process of storytelling, right? It was like when the first times you see him, he's calling it mumbo jumbo, and then by the end of the series, he's like he knows what he's doing. He's got what they call root work in his soul. And I wish I could say that his transformation was planned out from the beginning, and it wasn't. It just sort of happened along the way that it was like, oh, we kind of need a character here to to fill in this blank or to say something, or what I call the Winston Zeddemore effect, right? And Winston Zeddemore, of course, is the character Ernie Hudson played in Ghostbusters, and like my theory is that he's the most important of the Ghostbusters because he's the one who represents the audience. He's the one who represents the everyday experience of the audience, and so the black officer, who he's nameless right now, sort of represents that. He's meant to go along. At some point, he evolved into that character who begins to change his point of view, right? And then Sonny Ray, or it might be Johnny Ray, I can't remember his name either. He always served a very specific purpose, right? And which was, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't read the comic, was he was always meant to die, right? And in part, one of the oldest cliches in popular entertainment is you have that black character who dies, who then it lets you know that the danger is real, and it gives your white hero reason to seek vengeance and revenge. And I was like, okay, we're gonna do that, but we're going to take it one step further, right? We're going to use his death to change the outlook of one of the main characters. If not one, maybe all of them. But also we're going to show that evolution that I didn't, in Bitterroot, the main group of monsters, the Jinnu, are white people who've been infected by racism and hatred, and they transform into monsters. And I didn't want every white person in the story to be evil, right? I wanted there to be a character that the audience would eventually, though it might be grudgingly, start to like and start to have feelings for. And then I wanted to kill him, and I wanted to make sure that the reader felt that death so much, like I was like, I want them to cry. And I dragged out the process of killing Johnny Ray far longer than Chuck, my co-writer, kept trying to kill him all the time. And I was like, no, it's not, the reader's not there yet. They're not going to feel his death. It because he hadn't won over the family yet, right? He had to win over the family in order for the reader to really feel that death. And so that was and then in the wake of that, in the wake of his death, I always knew that Ford was going to begin to change his outlook on a lot of things. But then it like the opportunities grew even more. The opportunities grew because we kept that character alive for so long. And then when we did kill him, it caused within me as a writer this emotional, like, it was a gut punch to even write that scene. And I was like, okay, now I got to figure out where Ford is going to go from here, right? And ultimately he goes to see Johnny Ray's family, right? He goes to talk to them, and then that turns into a whole other thing. So but yeah, no, it was I think sometimes, we watch films, TV shows, we read comics, we read books, and there's always our main heroes, and they go on a journey, right? Every character should go on a journey, and if we otherwise they are flat, lifeless characters, right? And Bitterroot has some disposable characters that are essentially flat and lifeless. I mean, you can't get away from it. In Star Trek, they call them the red shirts, right? It was always that crew person in the red shirt who gets killed. But I really felt like there was an opportunity to sort of play with characters in the background. And I'll tell you where I got this from. A movie from the late 80s called When Harry Met Sally, where Carrie Fisher plays the best friend of Sally, and Bruno Kirby plays best friend of Harry. And like they have this incredible backstory that's only touched upon in a couple of key scenes, but through them, Harry and Sally begin to see the world differently. And I remember seeing When Harry Met Sally, I was in probably my early 20s, and just like wow, you can do that with your background, with your supporting characters. And although J.K. Rowling is a very problematic person, a very problematic writer, I hold to the fact that the most interesting character in all of the Harry Potter books is Neville Longbottom, who is a supporting character, right? But like in my mind, that's the most interesting character, right? And that's what I wanted to try to do especially with Johnny Ray, was like, yeah, I wanted people crying. That was it. Like that's the mean, sadistic bastard in me that wants my reader to cry.
I love it. And we actually have a question from that image from the audience. I'm going to share the image again so we don't have to go back to it later, remember everything that was said, right? So I believe that I know that the person asking the question is Hope Mueller, and I believe she's referring to the image on the right side of the page. So here's the question. And then Hope, feel free to type into the chat, you're wrong or you're right, and then we'll go with the answer. So one thing I noticed from the second frame, and I'm assuming that's what we're looking at, was the othering was shown so well in the physical appearance of the two people. One being more masculine, for example. Did you intend for this purpose of intimidation to make him take his words back, or was it what was the story behind their bodies?
Well, Ford was just meant to be the ultimate badass, right? Like that was how we when we created him, and so within the series, within Bitterroot, the Sangrier family, the extended family, because Berg is technically not a Sangrier, he's a Manigo, but the idea here is that the vast majority of the family believes that it's their duty to cure people of this infection, right? To try to purify the soul. Ford doesn't have that feeling, right? He believes there's only one thing to do, and that's you kill them all, right? And so the first time you see him, that's what he's doing. He's killing everybody. And so the fact that he doesn't kill Johnny Ray here is actually the first hint at there's more going on with this guy. He's not as binary as he comes across, right? And but we wanted, like I wanted John, and again, he might be Sonny Ray. I could be wrong. So isn't that terrible? You don't know the name. It's like not knowing the names of your kids or something. But I wanted him to be this sort of scrawny, weaselly looking guy who the reader didn't know if they should trust him or not. I mean, the first time we see him, he's wearing a Klan hood. He's at a cross burning and what's about to turn into a lynching. And so we had to think a lot about how to present that character, right? And the sort of the weaker he looks, the younger he looks, the more it makes, at least in my mind as a writer, the more it made it believable when that transition starts to happen, right? Like I see him being that character's 16, 17 years old, maybe 18 at the most. And he's just doing what everybody around him does, whether or not he believes it.
Alex?
I would also, if you don't mind, David, I would also say that one of the impressions I got from him in terms of him joining that clan group is he's looking for someone to look up to. He, you know, he's that he needed that pack. He needed that to be accepted by that group, of some group, you know, in order to feel a part of. And at this point now, all that's going to change for him. But it made sense to me, looking the way he did and what was going on and what happened as the story unfolded. It made sense to me that he started out where he was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if Ford had shot him in that moment of ultimate helplessness and practical surrender, it would have been a lot different than shooting him in the heat of battle, or as he did earlier. So that vulnerability, relying on that empathy. I mean, what you do in this frame is you show the guy's got empathy. He's going to still kill a lot of people, but there's something in there that's going to stop him from killing this guy. Yeah.
But David, it's funny. Something I thought about when I saw that the change in Cullen at the end. It's just those two kind of the physical drawing of those two reminded me of one another. Just because Cullen starts off differently than he looks at the very end, right? And I don't know if you did that on purpose. There were some similarities between the two of them. I know, as far as their origins, I don't think there is, but it's just something about the physicality of those two bodies, right? Because when we first see Cullen, I mean, from what I could tell, he's kind of scrawny, right?
Yeah.
And then when he comes back, though, his body has transformed in a way. And so I just drew a connection between the two of them. Maybe it's only physical, right? And maybe that means more, but.
Well, but the thing is they both go through transformations, right? And Cullen he disappears and then he comes back and he's battle scarred and he's more like Ford, and he's got this binary thinking, like, all we can do is kill, kill, kill. But he's, Cullen's got a lot of issues, that's for sure. And then he hates Johnny Ray for no reason other than he hates Johnny Ray, and that's the thing, like, Cullen isn't willing to give Johnny Ray a chance when Ford is. And that's the difference between the two of them. They're in a lot of ways, Cullen is trying to be like Ford, but he's not like Ford. And then later on, we see him evolving and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All right, then. On that note, we are going to go to Byron's picture, which is also a picture that Alex picked. So I think we'll have a lot to say about this one.
Cool.
Oh, the cover, yes.
Mine is signed.
Oh, fine. Be like that. Be like that. David, how could you do me like that, man?
Well,
next time I see you, I will sign whatever you want.
Okay. I'm good.
We just happen to be in the same space. So I'm very, very happy about that. Especially after I read it, I was very, very happy. So, I sent Scott a bunch of images today, right? Because I had a really hard time deciding, but I was just any of the images of Ma Etta just draw me in for a number of reasons. A part of that is the drawing of her facial features. And I'll explain that in a minute, but a lot of that also deals with memory for me, right? So I study memory. Part of what I do is look at race and memory and trauma. And every time that she's in one of the images, what do they call it? The
panels?
The panels, thank you. I almost said place. Yeah, one of the panels, I look at her and it just makes me think so much about my mother and my grandmothers. But specifically how they protect both gently, but also fiercely.
Yeah.
Right. Because this is what she does. And it's so beautifully drawn, though, with just even that look right there. Right. You see this kind of fierceness, but you also see this gentleness, I think, in her wanting to protect her family, right, and wanting to protect her people. But I think it's not just from the images, it's from the narrative that you give her as well, right? And so we hear that in the words that she speaks, but also in the way you position her, right? The poses that she has, the language she does, the way she's dressed, right? We see at one point her hair, right, is down. And it's always, for me, she's one of the characters that is always, that catches my eye, because it's almost like she's staring at you, right? And I don't know if you did that, if there was some intent behind that, but she seems like she's one of the characters that she was almost like she looks at the audience, right? Like she's staring at the audience for me. And so that draws me in, right? But I think the fact is that, for me, I mean, she kicks ass, right? Excuse my language, but this is, I see this so drawn so wonderfully through her. But she also kind of tells this story of, I think she tells this story of the trauma of Black folk as well, right? In that drawing, in the lines in her face and the way she stares at you, but also the memory that she evokes, right? I think she evokes this powerful memory of the power of Black folks broadly, but Black women more specifically, right? So yeah.
So Ma Etta. So Bitterroot is a collaboration between myself, Sanford Green, who is the artist, and Chuck Brown, who's the co-writer. And by the time they had brought me in, they had created a series of characters that didn't have much by way of backstory, or they just sort of existed in the moment. And then when I came on board, we started fleshing them out. And one of the things was always, well, what do we do with Ma Etta? Because originally she was just sort of like, she was the old matriarch of the family who knew about mixing roots. And I was like, well, she's not interesting right now, right? She's just an old Black woman, and old Black women are all interesting, right? And so in a lot of ways, she was a love letter, not just to my grandmother. My grandmother had, I want to say, 6 sisters, and I spent most of my childhood around 5 of them. My Aunt Gail didn't live nearby, but I mean, I would see my great aunts and my grandmother like all the time. And as a child, they were old ladies. That's it. But they weren't that old when I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, they were like in their 50s, maybe early 60s. But when we're kids, we don't think about our grandparents as young people and the things that they went through, right? And so whenever I would write Ma Etta or think about her, I would think about that fact that old people had lives before you met them. Your grandparents or your if you were fortunate enough to know your great grandparents, had lives before you met them. And I would think about what was Ma Etta's thing. And the one thing that, that was already determined even before I came on board was that she knew Harriet Tubman. That was the thing, right? I was like, okay, so she knew Harriet Tubman. And I was like, but what if her husband, the man she eventually married, was the son of someone who fought in the Haitian Revolution? What's that become, right? And we barely ever said it in the series, right? But this is all these things that I started thinking about. And I wanted her to be, and this is where I think that she's most like my grandmother for me as one of the team, was that my grandmother suffered a tremendous amount of loss. Her mother died when she was still really young. She had several miscarriages that no one ever talked about, but I happened to overhear a conversation once before I even knew what a miscarriage was. So I know my grandmother lost at least two children before they were born. But then my grandmother lost my dad and my uncle, one of my uncles, within a 2-year time span. They were both still in their 20s, right? My grandmother lost so much, and like she never let it show, you know, or at least I didn't see it because I was too young to understand it. And then the older I got, after she passed, I would, talk to some of my cousins. Remember when grandma did this? Remember when grandma did that? And it was like I started to realize again, like when you have a character who's older than everybody else in your story, you better be prepared to know what their story is, I just was having a conversation with someone the other day about Ma Etta and what she, what it means to have a matriarch and a matriarchal structure within your family. And I said, look, I can't speak for other Black families, but while my grandfather was the head of the house, it was a matriarchal family, right? The matriarchy ran, and it was straight across the board, and with all my grandmother's sisters, right? So I can only speak to them, but my grandmother used to drive around, and in the trunk of her car she had an axe and a saw, and if there was a tree that had fallen over on the side of the road, she would pull the car over and she would start chopping up the wood, sawing it up, and throwing it in the trunk of the car, right? And my cousins and I would be mortified by this. But she was always like, oh, baby, that's just free wood. That keeps the house warm, right? And as a child, again, that mortified me. But then I realized as I got older and after she was gone, I was like, my grandmother was prepared, and her priority was the warmth of her family. The priority was making sure everybody was fed. And I thought about that again, whenever there was a scene with Ma Etta, I would think about, how do we portray this old woman as being way more complex than most of us think of old people being.
Yeah. So can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
With the book I'm writing now, I just need you to write all that into my first chapter about my grandmother and food. I'll send you the file so you can just type that in.
Okay.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
Yeah, I do. I was just holding back, but you've said so many marvelous things, David, and it makes me partially feel like we had the same grandmother. 'Cause my grandmother was a remarkable individual, and one of the things that I am still quoting her on to this day is, when you can't laugh, they've won.
Yeah.
And that was something she used to say to me all the time. And as a kid, you're going, yeah, okay, sure. But the older I got, I went, okay, I got you. And sometimes when stuff is thick and it's hard, and I sit for a moment and I find something and I start smiling and I go, okay, Grandma, I hear you. It's very true. And the other thing I'll say is, one of my favorite scenes from real life and from some old films that I always found so fascinating is old, short Black women standing toe to toe with 6-foot, strapping, broad-chested Black dudes, and the Black dudes backing down. It's like, they don't take no stuff. And I'm thinking, that's a powerful person. And they are definitely just so full of history. And to use the title, they are rooted in history and life experiences. And if you are lucky enough to be open and listen, maybe you don't get it when they first say it, or the first 22 times they say it.
Yeah.
But at some point, that stuff starts coming back, and you're going, okay, yeah, wow, I didn't know, So you touched on so much of that, and I loved the character in the book. I mean, I have the graphic novel collection here, so I loved all of that. I love the fact that she also kicked much butt. You
Yeah.
know, it's because that's that thing where they're going, well, you know, she's going to be wise. She's going to be nurturing. She's going to, then she's going to be dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was good. And she's like, you know, bring it. And I went, yes. You know, so thoroughly, totally enjoyable ride with her. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and that was something that I also, not only did I get that from just the strength that I was raised around, but it was also, as a kid, I watched a lot of kung fu movies, right? And it seemed like inevitably, not all kung fu movies, but quite a few always had that older Chinese woman who just like there was no nonsense, right?
Okay.
And I, you know, when people live to be old, like like not everybody gets there. It takes a certain amount of strength, especially I think especially within, you know, a lot of cross sections of Black America, like the old people survived a lot, you know?
Yeah. Because they weren't going down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just
Go ahead, Caitlin. I'm sorry.
I think just to add to that too, like I really enjoyed every fighting scene with Ma Etta because it challenges, like actively challenges, kind of like the stereotype, like as y'all mentioned, like the stereotype of older adults and old women. And I think it challenges in that we see Ma Etta as an active participant in the resistance and in this like healing of like the monsters. She reminds me a lot of like my grandma. My grandma like came from like old South, born in 1933, in like the deep South of Louisiana, where like she's seen a lot of different stuff. I remember she fought off like two water moccasins just with like a water hose. And me, like, granted, I was like maybe 7 years old. Like I could have like stomped on them. I'm happy I didn't, but I was like, oh, they're snakes. And she's like, they're just snakes. Like they're just like trying to live like you are. And so I'm like, oh, well, thanks, Grandma. But like she was fearless to compared to what I saw her growing up as. And so whenever she died, I didn't realize like the significance of that. But now that I'm much older, I really appreciated like just how active that she was in our lives. And she was like going to casinos and like gambling and everything. Like looking back, I'm like maybe that was not the best idea, Grandma, but she lived her life and she was not like letting old age stop her from that. And so like that's where I've deeply appreciated Ma Etta's stories. Like she's not saying that she's just stopping. She's still an active person, and that is she's still living her life as opposed to like she's just lived it and it stops there.
And one of the things we did with her that I really pushed was that because we watch all these characters grow and evolve and change. And, you know, here she is, she's the matriarch of the family. She's 90 something years old, but even she changes and she realizes, and I was like, you know, I remember talking with Chuck and Sanford about it. And I was like, because originally the plan, the way Chuck and Sanford had envisioned it was Cullen was going to become the leader of the family. Right. And I was like, that's boring and no one's going to want to see it, right? Like we've seen that a million times. I was like, if we have Cullen and Blink standing side by side and we have a woman and all we do is relegate her to being a secondary character, a more passive character, or worse, a character who's like, gosh, I really want to be in a position of power, but the family's holding me back. Like, well, we've seen that a million times too, right? And so it was always like, no, Blink is going to be the one who's going to, she's going to take over the reins of the family. And then it became a question of who's going to make that decision. And it was Ma Etta's decision to be made, but it was more than just that decision because it was, no, I'm going to let you be more than, you know, more than I thought you were capable of. I can see it. It's not just doing the root work. It's not just a woman's place is not in the kitchen. That was really what it came down to. And I was like, if and I said that early on to Sanford and Chuck. I said, if all we do is show Belinda being frustrated because she's essentially stuck in the kitchen, and then we keep her in the kitchen, then we are as bad as all the characters that are holding her back. But not only that, we're as bad as the people in history that have held women back, especially Black women. And you know, I'm always very open about this. You know, I was raised on mass media of the patriarchy, right? I was raised on films and comics in which women are usually damsels in distress, victims, whatever, sex objects, you name it. And I can write an entire script to something and then realize, oh, I don't even have a woman in here, right? I mean, when I think about some of my favorite movies of all time, some of them don't got no women at all, or when they do show up, they're in, you know, questionable circumstances. And that's, as a creative person but also as a human being, that's one of my biggest struggles, is trying to break out of that trap. And it's hardwired in me, right? I mean, I do it all the time, and then again, somewhere between the end of the first draft and the beginning of the second draft, I usually go, wait a minute, okay, the character here that I can just, you know, like change. And now I'm not just thinking about changing gender so much as I am thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about, like, not just thinking in terms of two genders, right? Like, that's the other trap that I'm caught in, because I was raised, there's men and then there's women, right? And while I don't think that way, it's still, you know, blink, 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 you know? So I think that all of us, not just as whether we're creatives or just human beings, it's like we have to rethink how we think, and sort of pick apart, well, how did we get here? How did I, you know, and am I happy with this? Am I content thinking these outdated notions?
David, you know, I think, just really quickly, I was just in here listening to you talk about this. I think you really offer a response to Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Garden, because you give this power to these women, especially at the end when you bring the other character back, right? That second character, that link between those two women, right?
Yeah.
You really definitely hit this power, right? This thing that's intrinsic. I think it's, you know, when I saw that last, what is it again? That last panel,
yeah.
Right? When I saw that panel, thank you.
There'll be a test later.
Especially if it's still wet in New York. You know, seeing that, I mean, I kept thinking about Alice Walker's writing about, right? You know, what did specifically Black women have, right? And from my mother and from my grandmothers, it was this gardening, right? To have this power of gardening, to grow things, to bring things to life, right? And I think you do that beautifully in this graphic comic book, right? Is that you give them this power, right? That I think that you know, and you kind of mentioned this at the film talk, right? That one of the things you regretted about the documentary, right, was not maybe including more about women, in that documentary, right? But I think in this text, you really do a good job with responding to, you know, representing women and showing this power. And it's not just this power; it's this ability to develop and to grow something, right? Because Maeda has grown this beautiful family, right? I think she's grown this beautiful family that is powerful also, right? That can fight, that has to do this work, right? And so that's why I'm saying it's kind of a response to Alice Walker writing about, you know, trying to find that essence and that thing that Black women did, right? That went unacknowledged for so long, right? And I think you're representing that beautifully here in this story also.
Well, thank you. I've never, no one's ever mentioned Alice Walker and Bitterroot in the same conversation. So I'm like gushing, you know, like, okay, yeah, I will take that. Thank you. That is
Gush. Yes.
But again,
If I could just, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, there's a tremendous amount of respect paid to age in this character.
Mm.
And she's the one who we first see telling Blink to stay in the kitchen,
Yeah.
right? She's the one we first see telling her, you can't do that. And what I love about the respect paid to age is age isn't here to tell you a story about what it is. Age does what it needs to do in the context it's in. So there are many different images of her face when she has very different coherent emotional reactions to what's going on. And no one says, but you told me I couldn't before, or that's not what you said before. Age knows when to do what, and it's all in there all the time, right? It's just comes out when it comes out, when it's needed. And I just appreciate understanding and respecting age that way.
That's what happens when you get old. So
That's right. You do what you do when you need to do it. That's how it goes. Exactly. All right, we'll go to the next image here. This is Caitlin's. Yay.
Yeah, so I really like the scene. This is in the aftermath of like the Jinhu ravaging through Harlem, and then it was attacked like the Jinhus were attacking, and you have like the people of Harlem scared and seeking refuge with the Sangrier family. And I think Blick was just expressing like, well, what is the point of us doing this? Like, there's still danger. Why are we here? Like, what is the purpose? Like, we are supposed to be out there fighting them. And Maeda is like, yes, they are outside, but we still need to be there for the people that are scared. And I selected this one because I think, quite frankly, in my counseling psychologist brain, where we do value social justice and advocacy, yes, we have to take care of the people that may not be active or doing the same type of advocacy that we are. And I think it's also really just telling that I think like there's a tenseness between what advocacy or activeness is supposed to look like. And I've wrestled with this in my own brain with like, we need to be out there, we need to be doing the work, we need to be fighting, we need to be out, whereas with Maeda, like that older way of advocacy, it's yes, and here is advocacy too. And
yeah.
so what I'm noticing in this particular panel as well, it's what advocacy is supposed to be. And what I'm kind of throwing out there, maybe what it can be. Yes, you can be out with a picket sign and yelling and being out there, but it also can be taking care of the people who may not be there just yet or don't have the means to be there just yet. So this is the panel that I picked for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was this was crucial in that, again, like, how do you serve the people, right? How do you you like you said, you can go down with a picket line and you can march, or you can do this, you can do that, you can do the other. But when someone's hungry, they're hungry. When someone's cold, they're cold. And I think that's a again, a lot of this is stuff that was instilled in me, not just by my grandmother, but by her sisters, and by that particular generation. And that, but it also was necessary for Blink's evolution to see her go from, she's not ready to lead right now because all she wants to do is fight. She doesn't understand that there's more to it than the fight. And that's, but again, this is like, how do you get any opportunity to have Maeda drop some sort of pearl of wisdom was great. And also trying to get it to sound give her enough of that, for lack of a better term, to give it that country sound, right? Because a lot of us in the Black community, when you were talking about, Caitlin, you were talking about your family being from Deep South Louisiana, right? My family was from Deep South Virginia. I always say they were so far south in Virginia, they were really in North Carolina, right? And
which is where my
but
family's from.
yeah, and but we also had those family members who, they had a way of talking, maybe they had a really heavy accent, and like, to the untrained ear, they might not sound like the most intelligent person when really they're the smartest person in the world. And that's another thing that I wanted to try to get across as much as I could with Ma Etta, was have her talk in this sort of way that, it would be easy for people to dismiss her, but it would be at their own peril, right? And I just loved, I I just loved, I hung on every word that older generation told me as a kid growing up, it's and as I grow older, I miss them even more, right? I need their guidance now more in my 50s than I did when I was a teenager, because like now I'm really in the realm of the unknown. So
But you
Go
have
ahead.
some of their, what I would call their wisdom and insight stored in you. I tend to feel that people who are fortunate enough to have listened to the elders, as opposed to dismissing them, we carry that on. I mean, my quoting my grandmother, I mean, she was born in 07. When Caitlin was talking about when her mother was born, my mother was born in 27. I have their voices in my head here in 2024.
Yeah.
And if you spoke to my kids who are adults, they would tell you crying, yeah, we hear stuff our dad says in our heads now. We can't get rid of it. So some of that stuff is passed on. Some of that wisdom is the flaws too. But the bottom line is we carry that. We are continuing the story. And to some degree, again, those of us who listened and gathered something from it, I think that we shared that with the world at large. I know that my grandfather used to say something, I built the platform this high. You ought to stand on it and go farther. And, it's like, yeah, that's really, my job is not to raise my kids so that I can always be above them. My job is to try the best I can to give them something to stand on so that they do better than me.
Yeah.
And to be really happy about that, not to feel cheated or anything. No, to watch them go even further. That's wonderful. And I feel blessed to still feel that. So I think, David, yeah, we may want some more of that wisdom, but we're going to have to make the max of what we got, and then maybe something that we've learned, we can pass on to someone else and maybe they'll do even better. So that's sort of the way the system goes.
Yeah. David, I it's funny. We're all talking about, my mother's family's from the South, from Alabama, from Troy, Alabama, right? And, I hear so much of that though in this, right? I was fortunate enough to record my grandparents before they passed away, to get them tape. And so my brother's the keeper of those tapes. We would go down and record them talking these stories, right? That as a young kid, I was like, oh my God, what are they talking about? But now I can go back and listen to those pearls of wisdom, right? But I think that's the thing that hits me so hard about this. When I was reading about Ma Etta, I heard my grandmother Plaz in her, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I even saw her in her. I think that's why the way you drew her was just so kind of astonishing to me. I mean, it actually was shocking when I first opened this and looked at it. It it literally shook me. I was like, how he know my grandmother Plessy? Because I mean, we can all speak to that familiarity, right, of that drawing, right? Because they all did get those lines at some point, right? Of course, correct, but they did start getting those lines though at some point, right? And my grandmother lived to be 100 years old, so I had to both of those stories, but I think that's part of the beauty of this also is that while those elders aren't here, you really captured that essence, I think, of that elder statesperson in the text, right? And through the drawing and just through, for me, when I watch film and when I read, I always kind of feel a spirit of that character. And that's what I did. And I'll be honest, I had a long battle with liking male writers, especially Black male writers, for a long time because I was so taken back with Black women writers, right? And I think I've got to the point now where I'm starting to appreciate Black men writing and the voice that they're giving their characters. This has taken me over the top. Where I really appreciate because that essence is just there. I mean, you capture the essence of, like I said, my grandmother died when she was 100. My mother was born in 1923, right? So, this speaks a lot to when my grandparents were born in Alabama. But it just that voice and that essence and that spirit is there, right? It's amazing to me the way you captured that. So, I think those aunties and your grandmother are I think they're just in there and they're coming out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think just to add a little bit too, like the way in which like Maya, when she's not fighting either, she's also cooking and creating. And so like whenever I saw that scene with like the panel that I picked, then I'm like, oh, I remember my own grandmother using food as a form of not only just comfort, but as a way of nourishment and creating an opportunity for that nourishment. And I think, quite frankly, I can't speak for everybody else, but being from the South and like Southern Black folks, that is our way of connection and nourishment and quite frankly, resisting systemic devaluation, right? When we think about enslaved folks, a lot of soul food came from having the scraps and having to create, create food for nourishment. And throughout Southern history, now we know what that is as soul food, right? And that was something that my grandma had really instilled in me. And the funny part is she might be rolling over in her grave. I'm vegan. So a lot of the recipes that I have to, that I have in my head from her, I create something different, right? But not so different that doesn't take out the essence of what she was doing and what she was making. So I think just to kind of add that, I think Ma Etta very much shows like how she's actively passing down these like nuggets, like these wise lessons for her family to continue growing overall. So I thought that was just a really beautiful example of Ma Etta in my own grandma.
I just wanted to also say, I'm sorry, Caitlin, I didn't mean to.
That's
did I cut you off? Oh, okay. No. I also wanted to say this page, which by the way, I noticed we most of us picked a page as opposed to a panel. The other thing about this page, that's a lesson. It's a lesson in resistance. It's a lesson in rebellion, but it's a lesson in humanity as well. It is not just about fighting or killing or destroying. It's about sharing, and it's about caring. It's about love. It's about nurturing. You can fight for the people. Yeah, you can do that. But if you really care about them, then you're going to take care of them on as many levels as you possibly can. And when you're cold or hungry or scared, because not everybody is a fighter, when you're standing in front of these people, you can't look at them as trash. this is the reason you fight for it. They even did that line, I forget which writer did it, with Superman and Batman in one of the graphic novel compilations. Batman and Superman are standing in a cornfield in Kansas, and basically Superman says to Batman, "This is what I fight for." He says, "You fight against the Joker and the Riddler and anything. This is what I fight for." So, it's understanding that, yeah, I'm going to resist. I'm going to battle evil. I'm going to stand up, to monsters and maybe die in the process. But that's not all I am, and that's not all we are. There is the love, there is caring, there is affection, there is nurturing, there is comfort, and I can offer that too, and should and will. And so she is holistically a complete human being, and that's what we need to share.
Well, on that comment you made about holistic, this idea that she's been alive as long as she has, she's experienced all the things that she has, and she is a complete being. And I just love the fact that she becomes whatever lived being she needs to be from her life in the moment, depending on the context that demands it. This image, this facial expression, this frame is different than the one that we saw on the cover, where her basically looking at the audience saying, "I'm dangerous." In this moment, she's saying, "You should remember we're caring," because she's just kind of been yelled at by her granddaughter. So there's a little sternness in the look, and it's also, "You should know this." And but it's a clear look. What I want to do is just go to the frames I picked. And I think it just continues this theme of Ma Etta. What I loved about this story was the very different ways different people dealt with the issue of racism. Even in the same family, there were many different tensions about how to deal with it. I thought that was very honest, authentic, and terribly important to be said. And in this page on the left, we see one of the more scientifically minded members trying to use science as a way to address racism. And this frame here where he says, "We need the Sanguiers on our side. They know the roots better than anyone else." And then you've got Ma Etta there with this look on her face that she's not had before. This is a professional root expert who's figuring out the exact dosage or whatever she needs to do what she's about to do. And the use of the word roots there is just wonderful, right? Because it's not just the roots in the ground, it's the roots in the life. So I don't need to go through the rest of the page. I just thought juxtaposing those two stories against each other, the more tech-minded versus the more, dare I say, root-minded. And then the fact that he says, "Hey, we need to go talk to them because they're the ones that really know the roots." I thought that was, first of all, terribly consistent with the ongoing narrative, but also just fantastically insightful about generations.
Well, I think that's like the current tension right now in our generation. Whether we stick to what is old, and I mean, granted, my family, my grandmother was very much aware of root work, and as I was growing up, we started getting the Nintendo Game Boy, and we got the Nintendo GameCube. We were getting more access to technology, computers. I might be aging myself a little bit, like MySpace. So we were getting all of that. And it was, for me, I was like, "Oh, grandma, y'all just old people. You don't need Facebook, grandma. You don't need MySpace." Or it was seen as something that are we losing the old way in favoring for something that is more technological? And I think that's something that we're still working with now as a generation of, we're moving more into AI, right? And seeing the dangers of it, seeing maybe the dangers, but I think maybe the dangers, I don't know just yet. I mean, I haven't
guaranteed there will be danger. Yeah, whatever
yes.
good might come of it, there will be danger. Yes.
Yes. But also how do we go back to the old way, or can there be a balance of both? And I think that's a nice tension, or maybe question for us as the audience to really think about.
But David, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
I love the panel that you showed, Scott, right? Juxtaposition. But then I wonder, is it really a juxtaposition, right? Because isn't that root medicine actually the science, though? Right? For me, I can't separate those two things because I see that science, if you think about it, that science comes from, right, that root making, right? I remember my great grandmother was kind of like a midwife, right, who helped deliver babies, but also took the oh gosh, what's it called? The afterbirth, right? The placenta, right?
Placenta, yeah.
Yeah, and did things with that, right? That was maybe what we might not consider science, but it was a science for her and for those who believed in that science, right? And thinking about ways of protecting that newborn child, right, with that placenta, and doing things with that placenta that were meant to keep the baby healthy also, right? And of course, this was, late 1800s, early 1900s, right, turn of the century. But for me, I think that was so interesting that the panel, what you showed, Scott, because when I saw that, I was like, this is interesting, right? Because this is a way of speaking of that other science, right? That maybe we might not consider science, but it's a science, right? Nonetheless, at least in my mind, it is. So I wonder, David, what were you thinking, right, when you did that, right? Are you speaking to something that's maybe we haven't spoken to about those two things, or?
Well, really what I was speaking to more than anything else was that particular character, Dr. Sylvester, who's saying, we need to get the Sangriers onto our side, right? At that point, what he doesn't realize and what the family has yet to discover is that there's a new threat that they're facing, right? And that threat is what happens to us as Black folks when the hatred and the oppression that we face turns us into a monster, right? And so the family has yet to really experience this, right? They've never, and this is getting also at the heart of some of the other work that I'm doing, which is that as Black folks, we are what white people tell us we are. We are what white people make us, right? And there's an entire ideology and a systemic system of oppression that turns us into things that we don't want to be. And so Dr. Sylvester is trying to figure out how to control it, thinking that it's the same thing that the Sangrier family's fighting. And what they're going to discover as the story progresses is, no, these are two different things. They're interconnected, but we are turned into something through no fault of our own, and how do we control it? And then as the story progresses, we start to realize that, and this is sort of me working with the idea of the Harlem Renaissance, but it's also going to, like what Caitlin was saying, right, with the birth of soul food, right? Soul food and jazz and hip hop and all these things that we're known for are all made from the discards and scraps of what we were given. We turned, pig intestines into, I ain't gonna eat them, but that's me.
Caitlin's not going to be eating them either, right?
Yeah.
Tripe. Oh my God.
Yeah, but again, and I this is, for me growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was seeing hip hop emerge from, we made music out of essentially nothing. And jazz, so much of jazz were these musicians taking instruments. John Coltrane, what he did with the saxophone was not what the saxophone was meant to do, and so that's sort of, this is sort of me playing with some of these ideas, is like, how do we create whether it's science or magic that's going to serve us? And again, as the story progresses, it's like, okay, well, if we're going to be turned into monsters, what do we do with that monstrosity? Do we do because I loved Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? That the monster, the creature, is not the monster of the story.
Doctor, yeah.
It's the doctor. It's and all the monster wants to do is survive. Godzilla, Godzilla was just asleep in the ocean, and then the evils of man awoke him, right? I mean, I as a kid, I always had a soft spot for the monsters, because the monsters were almost always these tragic characters that I was telling my students the other day. I said, the shark is not the villain of Jaws. The shark is just hungry, right? He's just going about his business, and they kill him. So that's a sort of how I think about it. So that juxtaposition is really about that those 2 pages, I think, more than anything, to me, are like setting the opening the door to the reality that, okay, what both of these characters think is about to be turned upside down.
Well, that's a little bit after 8:30, so unfortunately we have to bring this amazing conversation to a close. Byron, Caitlin, Alex, and Eric, thanks so much for joining us at ReggieCon and helping us celebrate Black History Month.
This was excellent.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Oh,
thank you for inviting Mr. Walker here too.
Yeah, thank you. David, this was great. This was really good.
David, was an absolute blast to discuss your creative work with you this evening. Thanks for joining us, and we look forward to the next time. And then, while we're here, no, not yet. I want to let everybody know what we're doing in March. We're celebrating Women's History Month, Tuesday, March 26th, with a discussion of Amy Kurzweil's Artificial. And as panelists, we have Dr. Leandra Paris, Dr. Gopayati Bhatnagar, Dr. Shelley Clevenger, and Dr. Allison Wynn. So we want to once again thank all the people in the background, making us look like we know what we're doing. Thanks to all of you for attending. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes. Again, until next time, everyone, have a good evening.
That they can do it again once we might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said, with the last one.